All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're going to be talking about the Seattle Seahawks. Obviously, last year, they did a phenomenal job. This team was projected like, 4 or 5 wins. They end up rattling off 9. They go to the playoffs. They're beating San Francisco at halftime. A lot to be excited about with the Seahawks team. One reoccurring theme I've just noticed is I like to compare it to just a big fat game of chess. I mean, they're playing their cards perfectly, and they just killed the offseason. I mean, they just seriously killed it this offseason. They killed it in the draft. We're going to mainly talk about the draft in tonight's video. Devon Witherspoon, JSN, Jackson Smith-Njigba, you get 2 day 1 starters right there. Devon Witherspoon and JSN themselves, these guys have this charisma around them. Specifically JSN, I know we didn't see much of him at Ohio State this past season due to injury, but I guarantee you if JSN played healthy last season, like the whole season for Ohio State, I guarantee you he would have been undisputed a top 15 draft pick. My take is he would have been a top 10 pick, more closer to 10 than say like 5. But JSN, day 1 starter, he fits this offense perfectly. Devon Witherspoon, just keep building up that defense. Ended up being kind of the pain. Am I allowed to say ass on YouTube? It ended up being the thorn. Of course, I can't think of the analogy with a thorn, but the defense last year was their big issue. All right. And we saw that, a lot of things to be impressed with the defense, specifically a lot of their younger cats, but they focused on it immediately in free agency. Very uncharacteristic of recent Seahawks, like in the last decade at least, where they're just hammering home on the defensive side in free agency, headlined by guys like Jermon Jones. I really like Julian Love. I even like flyers on Devin Bush. They did a great job in free agency on both sides of the football. But Devon Witherspoon's a guy who's going to come in. He's got that it factor. He loves to hit. That's what you want in DBs. I know it sounds crazy, but I'm a Packers fan. I think of my boy Kevin King, he had a couple of good years with my Packers, but I don't view Kevin King as a guy who's itching to hit somebody. Devon Witherspoon is he loves to hit. All right. Derek Hall in the second round. One thing I really like about Derek Hall, he's coming out of Auburn. I love my SEC players. I think they're just built and bred differently. 4-year player. All right. This was a 4-year guy at Auburn. A great football school, an SEC team. He played a little bit of linebacker. He played a little bit defensive line. He had a bunch of tackles for loss, over almost 25 total tackles for loss in the past 2 years at Auburn. He had over 15 total sacks in his last 2 seasons at Auburn. So Derek Hall, early second-round draft pick, not necessarily a day 1 starter, but I love what he's going to provide long-term and next year for this Seahawks defense. Zack Sharbane, I love the Seahawks running back room. I am just absolutely obsessed with it. Kenneth Walker III, just a stud, an actual stud. Now I got Charbonnet, who can do a little bit of everything. You also have DJ Dallas. Don't forget about Double D. Love calling him Double D, by the way. But Zack Charbonnet is a guy who, once again, you have Kenneth Walker as RB1. But we know, especially with Pete Carroll, and we know running backs in general, you want Kenneth Walker to have 25 carries a game because you want the ball in his hands as much as possible. But injuries, especially with young players, we kind of saw it last year, acclimating to a full 17-game season. Basically 1 month from now, it's going to be work, grind, all the way up until, January for these guys. So durability is extremely important, and that's why I just really like the depth with this running back room. And I think Zack Charbonnet is perfect, as all Seahawks fans know that as well. Fourth round, Anthony Bradford, offensive guard out of LSU. Big fan of this pick. You can never have too many offensive linemen. It actually reminds me, by the way, guys, hit that like button, hit that sub button. Seahawks fans, I love you guys so much. It's kind of like a late night, just kind of rattling off some opinions here on the Seahawks draft class. Nothing too fancy. So I appreciate all the love. Love reading your guys' comments, but be sure to hit that like button, hit that sub button if you haven't already. We're trying to hit 35,000 subscribers, which sounds crazy to say out loud. Oh my goodness, by the start of training camps, about a month away. So I appreciate you guys. Anthony Bradford, though, you could just never have too many offensive line guys on the offensive line, especially considering the Seahawks statistically and eye test, their offensive line last year was certainly not a huge strength. I love some of the pieces they have, specifically Damian Lewis at that left guard position, Charles Cross as well. But I really like the left side of the offensive line for Seattle. We know that center position has plagued them for a while, like at least 8 years now. I know Anthony Bradford doesn't play offensive guard or doesn't play center, he plays offensive guard, but point still stands. It reminds me of I covered the Raiders last season. I remember the Raiders were cycling in. I think it was the first 6 games they had a different starting line every game. I remember complaining or pointing that out in a video. And so I remember so vividly getting a comment saying why is that a bad thing? The Bears have done the same thing. I'm like, ooh. Take it from a guy who lived in Chicago for 22 years, especially the recent Bears team. That's not really who you're trying to emulate. But nonetheless, you can never have too many guys on the offensive line. That gets me pointed to, first off, you drafted Cameron Young, another SEC cat. Mike Morris, just extremely underrated. You got him in the 5th round, defensive end rusher from Michigan. In this past season, he had kind of actually almost similar stats to Derek Hall. He had 7.5 sacks, 11 total tackles for loss. Michigan, just another great school. I love, I know it sounds cliche, but it's just a great football program. And I like taking guys from great football programs. I know that sounds obvious and redundant, but nonetheless, I'm big on Mike Morris, especially as a player. His story is crazy. In a different day with more time, we can get a little bit deeper into Mike Morris' story. But if you are a Seahawks fan, I urge you to look into it if you haven't already heard it. But mainly I wanted to talk finally about Olu Olafi because I don't know how on earth this guy fell to the 5th round. Ask any Michigan fan. He's a center, 5th round. It's baffling. Ask any NFL draft analyst. I don't know how he fell to the 5th round. I really don't. This is like a 3rd round talent at worst here. Next season, I like the addition of Evan Brown a lot. All right. And if we take a look at the depth chart in general, if Damian Lewis, once again, just very big on him, I wouldn't even be opposed to throwing Evan Brown at left guard and then throwing Olu at the center position immediately. But once again, I'm not worried about Damian Lewis, and that's not what I'm going to be doing. Olu probably, Pete's going to play the best guys, right? He's going to play the best starting 5 out there. I do think it'll be Evan Brown. But one thing I think is really important to note is, first off, Olu's a stud. He didn't allow a sack last year. He didn't allow a sack last season. So that's a big deal in its own regard. But we go back to the chess comment that I made at the beginning of this video. Evan Brown's on a 1-year contract. The future of the center position for the Seattle Seahawks, as I'm sure, once again, every Seahawks fan is especially excited to hear because it's been almost a decade since you've had a consistent center. Olu Olafi, long-term, is that dude. The Seahawks offensive line in the future looks phenomenal. And Evan Brown on a 1-year contract, I think, was a great move. Who knows? Maybe Olu breaks out immediately in camp. They like what they see and they give him the starting nod immediately. But once again, I'm projecting it's going to be Evan Brown at that center position, I think, as it should be. But long-term, it just gets me thinking they're playing a fat game of chess. And in my last Seahawks video, I had the take of saying it wouldn't surprise me if the Seattle Seahawks won the division next year. I think the Rams are sleepers. I think the Rams will win at least 8 games. I don't think they'll win double-digit games. San Francisco's got a great roster. Can they stay healthy? What's the quarterback position looking like? There's just some uncertainties with that team. Long-term, though, whether it's this upcoming year or the year after it, Seattle is built. They're built to last. They're built to win. And you see it in the draft class. You see it in free agency. So both short-term and long-term, Seattle's stocked up, baby. That's it for today. Hit that like button, hit that sub button. But more importantly, guys, let me know your thoughts on this Seahawks draft down below.